They found his body in the wine cellar, a single bullet hole through his heart. But the real mystery. The only person in the house that night was the quiet maid who couldn't even meet his eyes. The police dismissed her immediately. A trembling girl with calloused hands couldn't possibly take down the city's most feared mafia boss. But they didn't know what I know. They didn't see what happened in those shadowed halls, didn't hear the whispered phone calls, didn't notice the way her fear slowly transformed into something far more dangerous. This is the story of how the most powerless person in that mansion became its most deadly player. Marco Valenti ruled the city like a king rules his kingdom. His mansion stood on the hill overlooking everything he controlled, the docks, the clubs, the politicians in his pocket. Inside those walls, 30 rooms held secrets that could destroy families. Marco himself was a mountain of a man, scarred and cold-eyed, feared by everyone who knew his name. Then came Elena. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, sent by the agency with nothing but a small bag and downcast eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, showed her the servants' quarters and explained the rules. Never speak unless spoken to, never enter the East Wing, never ask questions. Elena nodded silently, her hands folded like a prayer. Marco barely noticed her that first week. She was just another shadow moving through his home, polishing silver and scrubbing floors. But I noticed something the others missed. When Elena thought no one was watching, her eyes weren't meek at all. They calculated. They measured. They planned. Elena learned the rhythms of the house quickly. Marco hosted meetings every Thursday in his study. His second-in-command, Vincent, arrived at 8 sharp. The guards changed shifts at midnight. The security cameras had blind spots near the servants' stairwell and the garden entrance. She memorized everything while saying nothing. The other staff pitied her. "Poor thing," whispered Rosa, the cook. "So young to be working in a place like this." They didn't know that Elena had already survived worse than Marco Valenti. Her father had been a small-time dealer who'd crossed the wrong people. They'd made her watch when they came for him. She was 12. That night had carved something out of Elena's heart and replaced it with ice. Now, 8 years later, she moved through Marco's mansion with purpose disguised as servitude. She kept her hair tied back severely, wore oversized uniforms, made herself invisible. And every night, she documented everything in a notebook hidden beneath her mattress. Names. Schedules. Weaknesses. The first crack in Marco's armor appeared on a Saturday night. Elena was cleaning the hallway outside his study when she heard him shouting on the phone. His voice, usually controlled, carried panic. "I don't care what it takes. Find who leaked the shipment route." Someone inside his organization was betraying him. Elena's heart quickened. Betrayal meant paranoia. Paranoia meant mistakes. She began staying later, volunteering for night shifts that let her move through the mansion after dark. The guards grew accustomed to seeing her, barely acknowledging her presence. She was just the maid, after all. What threat could she possibly pose? One evening, while dusting Marco's private office, she found it, a ledger hidden behind false books. Page after page of transactions, names of corrupted officials, records of shipments. This single book could destroy Marco's entire empire. Elena photographed every page with a phone she'd bought with cash, hands steady despite her racing pulse. This was her insurance policy, her weapon. But she needed more than evidence. She needed access to the man himself. Opportunity arrived wrapped in tragedy. Mrs. Chen suffered a stroke and was rushed to the hospital. With the head housekeeper gone, someone needed to serve Marco his meals directly. Elena volunteered before anyone else could. The first time she entered Marco's private dining room, he didn't even look up from his steak. She set down the wine glass with careful precision, her face a perfect mask of submission. But she'd added something to his whiskey, not poison, nothing so crude. Just a mild sedative, barely noticeable, enough to dull his usually sharp instincts. Night after night, she served him. Night after night, he drank. And slowly, imperceptibly, Marco Valenti began to relax around the silent girl who brought his food. He started speaking in her presence, taking phone calls, even laughing at Vincent's crude jokes while she cleared plates. To Marco, Elena had become part of the furniture. Invisible. Harmless. Exactly as she intended. She learned that Marco's biggest shipment of the year was coming in 3 weeks. 40 million in stolen pharmaceuticals. Every major player in his organization would be involved. Elena's real plan began to take shape. She wasn't just gathering evidence. She was building a case that would interest the one man who terrified even Marco Valenti. District Attorney James Morrison had spent 15 years trying to bring down the Valenti empire. Every witness disappeared. Every case crumbled. But Morrison was patient, methodical, and unlike the corrupt officials in Marco's ledger, he couldn't be bought. Elena sent her first anonymous package to Morrison's private office. Copies of the ledger pages, details of the upcoming shipment, and a simple typed note. More to come. Trust no one in your department. Meanwhile, she continued her performance. Quiet Elena. Obedient Elena. Elena who flinched when Marco raised his voice, who kept her eyes down, who seemed grateful just to have a job. But late at night, she made phone calls from a burner phone in the garden. She cultivated a source, a young guard named Tony who treated her kindly and hated Marco for killing his brother over a perceived slight. Tony didn't know he was being recruited. He just thought the pretty maid enjoyed his company. 3 days before the big shipment, Marco's paranoia reached new heights. He accused Vincent of being the leak, nearly shooting him in the study before his lawyers convinced him to wait for proof. The mansion became a pressure cooker of suspicion and fear. The staff walked on eggshells. Everyone except Elena. She moved through the chaos like a ghost, bringing Marco his meals, his coffee, his whiskey. Always the whiskey with its subtle additions. His sleep grew restless. His judgment clouded. He began making mistakes, snapping at loyal associates, trusting the wrong people, dismissing real threats while chasing shadows. Elena fed him false clues, tiny suggestions planted like seeds. A misplaced word here. A conveniently overheard conversation there. She turned his paranoia into a weapon aimed at his own organization. And then came the night that changed everything. Marco called her to his study at midnight. Elena's heart hammered, but her face remained calm as she entered. He sat behind his desk, a gun resting beside his hand, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "You," he said. "You're the only one I can trust." Marco's confession stunned her. In his paranoid state, he'd convinced himself that Elena, invisible, powerless Elena, was the only person with no motive to betray him. He told her things he'd never shared with Vincent or his lawyers. He revealed the real location of his offshore accounts, his backup plans, his escape route if everything collapsed. Elena listened, her face sympathetic, her hands folded. Inside, she was memorizing every word. "Everyone wants something from me," Marco said, his voice raw. "But you just do your job. No questions. No demands." He laughed bitterly. "Maybe I should have surrounded myself with maids instead of soldiers." She poured him more whiskey. "You can trust me, sir," she said softly. It was one of the few times she'd spoken directly to him. Marco nodded, drinking deeply. He didn't notice how her hand trembled slightly as she set down the decanter. Not from fear, from the thrill of having him exactly where she wanted him. The next morning, she sent D.A. Morrison another package. This one contained account numbers, passwords, and the exact time and location of the pharmaceutical shipment. The night of the shipment arrived. The mansion emptied as Marco's entire operation mobilized. Even most of the guards left, leaving only Tony and 2 others to watch the property. Marco himself stood in the foyer, checking his phone obsessively, dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the gun beneath his jacket. Elena brought him his pre-departure whiskey. "For luck, sir," she said quietly. He downed it in one swallow and left without another word. What Marco didn't know, the FBI and D.A. Morrison were waiting at the docks. Every detail Elena had provided was being used to coordinate the largest bust in the city's history. 40 million in pharmaceuticals. 15 of Marco's top associates. All the evidence needed to connect them to murders, trafficking, and corruption. But Elena wasn't finished. While the authorities closed their trap at the docks, she moved through the mansion with Tony's help. The young guard, convinced he was protecting her from Marco's enemies, helped her access the master safe in the East Wing. Inside, cash, documents, and most importantly, the original ledgers, the ones that even the FBI didn't know existed yet. The raid lasted 40 minutes. By midnight, news broke across every channel. Marco Valenti arrested, his organization dismantled, the biggest mafia bust in decades. The city celebrated. The district attorney became an instant hero. And in the mansion, Elena sat in the servants' quarters with her packed bag, waiting. She'd arranged everything. A new identity. A flight leaving at dawn. And most of the money from Marco's safe, carefully laundered through accounts he'd never know to trace. She'd left enough evidence for the FBI to find the rest, ensuring Marco would spend life in prison. When Tony came to check on her, worried about what would happen to the staff, Elena thanked him for his kindness. She meant it. He'd been a good person trapped in a bad situation. She hoped he'd find his way out. At 3 a.m., she walked out of the mansion for the last time. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. She was just the maid, after all. Powerless. Forgettable. Invisible. Exactly as she'd always intended them to believe. 6 months later, in a small cafe in Barcelona, a young woman sat reading the newspaper. Her hair was different now. Lighter, cut short. She wore elegant clothes and spoke perfect Spanish. She looked nothing like the timid maid who'd once scrubbed floors in Marco Valenti's mansion. The newspaper carried a small story. Marco Valenti sentenced to life without parole. D.A. Morrison had built an airtight case using evidence from an anonymous source who'd never been identified. Elena smiled and folded the paper. She'd taken everything from the man who represented everything that had destroyed her father. Not just his freedom, his empire, his money, his legend. She'd exposed him as what he truly was. Just another criminal undone by his own arrogance. The powerful always made the same mistake. They never saw the threat in the powerless. They never imagined that the person serving their meals, cleaning their floors, watching from the shadows, might be the most dangerous enemy of all. Elena finished her coffee and left cash on the table. She had a flight to catch. A new life waiting. And the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, the underestimated don't just survive. They win. Subscribe for daily Mafia boss stories where the powerful are exposed and the underestimated rise.